No, we are not reviewing a Cybertruck. We haven't been offered one, nobody has one in this area. Sorry if I got your hopes up with that thumbnail. But this is a different kind of video, because I don't know, is there anybody on Earth who didn't think the Cybertruck was a bad idea from jump? Okay, I'm sure there are people who absolutely love Elon Musk and all of his ideas, and I don't want to cast shade on any of those people, because we like who we like and we respect who we respect. And maybe in another timeline, Elon Musk is somebody I would have looked up to, considering how short I am, coupled with how likely he would have let me down. But I suppose to truly feel let down by a billionaire with the temperament of a bully in a Wattpad novel, you have to expect more from them than car designs out of a jagged dystopia and social media posts that prove you're emotionally frozen at whatever age you first become famous, provided we subtract a good 20 years. Okay, maybe I do want to shade Elon, because really the only difference between the terminally online Elon bros and wine-fueled Swifties is that Elon might actually see the paragraph-long defense because he's terminally online too. And let me just preempt all the criticisms. I've never run a company that made millions. I've never run a company that's developed anything proprietary. I've never developed anything that anybody will ever use. I never will. I know nothing about business or what it takes to run a company. No one will ever look to me for an opinion on how to run a business, how to manage money and resources, or how to withstand a global online presence as one of the most significant news figures on the planet. And I totally am jealous of how much wealth and influence the guy has, and the fact that the things he's capable of doing are things I would never be capable of doing myself. But the biggest fallacy on the face of the earth is that you need to be in a business you're criticizing to be able to criticize it. That you need to have achieved success yourself before you're allowed to have an opinion. Which is not to say that anybody is under any obligation to take anyone's opinion seriously, much less mine. But I find Elon Musk exhausting, and I find his products exhausting, and I find the discourse surrounding him exhausting. So I guess I'm going to contribute to it now, because this month's Roman Report, we're going into the latest Tesla debacle, because the Cybertruck is in an interesting position right now. It's finally starting to appear in the wild as more people come to own them nationwide, yet the end result is that it's coming under greater scrutiny, resulting in the discovery of a number of concerning issues. Well, one in particular. So let's get into discussing the Cybertruck and all the controversy surrounding a car that is allegedly more dangerous than it looks.
Roman Report at the end of the month, and I make what I want when I feel like discussing cars.
So the Cybertruck is currently under recall to the tune of some 3,878 units. The safety recall report by the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration, released earlier this month, elaborated on why. Quote, "On affected vehicles, when high force is applied to the pad on the accelerator pedal, the pad may dislodge, which may cause the pedal to become trapped in the interior trim above the pedal." End quote. The report adds that, quote, "If the pad on the accelerator pedal becomes trapped in the interior trim above the pedal, the performance and operation of the pedal will be affected, which may increase the risk of a collision." End quote. So basically, the issue may cause uncontrollable acceleration, resulting in injury or worse. Now, this affects vehicles manufactured between November 13th, 2023 and April 4th, 2024, so it's a thankfully small sample size when you consider how much worse this could have turned out. But the question remains, how exactly did this happen? Well, according to the recall report, the issue stems from soap. Yeah, that stuff that little Tommy Fenstermacher's mom used to wash out his mouth when he said he was going to clap the babysitter's cheeks like a stadium cheering a free throw from half court. Soap is the cause of a potential catastrophe that's hurt the Tesla stock price almost as much as the company letting go of over 10% of their worldwide workforce, which is kind of a tongue twister for a guy like me with a lisp. Now, thankfully, nobody has been hurt, to my knowledge, but it's terrifying to think that a near disaster could have had such a relatively mundane cause. So what happened? Well, for that we turn again to the safety recall report, which states, quote, An unapproved change introduced lubricant, soap, to aid in the component assembly of the pad onto the accelerator pedal. Residual lubricant reduced the retention of the pad to the pedal. End quote. What's wild about all of this is that this was apparently brought to light not by internal testing practices, but by a social media post. A man by the name of Jose Martinez took his Cybertruck to a drag strip in California earlier this month, only to discover that the truck would accelerate on its own. Now, luckily, the brakes were working, so he managed to stop the car, whereupon he discovered the loosened rubber cover that had pinned the accelerator down. As he would later tell NBC News, the car would lunge ahead at full throttle the minute he took his foot off the brake, and this was after reportedly owning the car for less than a week. Thankfully, his location allowed him to adjust on the fly so that we didn't end up with a more tragic situation than just a malfunctioning car. Quote, I had space where I could figure out what was going on. It wasn't a situation where there were cars in front of me, or a building, or a tree. End quote. The recall report gives an overview of the timeline, and to Tesla's credit, the company acted with the quickness. Tesla was first notified of the consumer complaint on March 31st, and by April 2nd, company engineers were poring over the data logs for the vehicle, which seemed to confirm that the vehicle was working as intended. But then a second consumer claim came through the very next day, and so Tesla's engineers got to work trying to recreate the malfunction. Just 5 days later, on April 8th, the team received images from the first customer claim that seemed to confirm the malfunction. The tests continued through the week until, on April 12th, the company came to the voluntary decision to issue a recall. The wording of the report doesn't seem to confirm or deny that the team was successfully able to recreate the conditions of the malfunction, but whether they could or not, it seems they were acting from an abundance of caution. An ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure, as they say. But the end result is the same. A further decline in the stock price that has already fallen by more than 30% in the first quarter of this year alone. The Cybertruck coming out of beta, so to speak, and reaching the general public was supposed to be a shot in the arm for the brand. But between performance and general wear and aesthetic complaints, that hasn't really been the case for the Cybertruck. Really, the Cybertruck has taken a beating in the court of public opinion pretty much since it was first announced, starting with that disastrous live demonstration 5 years ago where Elon broke the supposedly unbreakable glass. I don't think I'd seen a live keynote that disastrous that wasn't part of an E3 presentation. The Cybertruck immediately fell under heavy scrutiny from industry experts and casual observers alike for issues relating to the aesthetic. I'm talking stuff like misaligned panels and passenger doors. Even Elon himself expressed disappointment in a leaked internal memo that hit the news last August, stating, quote, due to the nature of Cybertruck, which is made of bright metal with mostly straight edges, any dimensional variation shows up like a sore thumb. End quote. Elon had also reportedly stated that the truck would be built on a solid steel exoskeleton that would render it nearly indestructible, yet the end product appeared to have no such structure in place at all, with some online going as far as to pick through pictures from the assembly line to point out the presence of a unibody chassis. The claims of the truck being indestructible, or as Elon would say, apocalypse-proof, would be tested by owners online, who would do everything from launching flames at it to shooting it up to smashing it with sledgehammers. It got to the point where engineer Wes Morrill had to get on social media to demonstrate the truck's indestructibility so people would stop beating the hell out of their Cybertrucks. It was all part of an ongoing series of weird stories surrounding the Cybertruck. For example, in January, the Drive would reveal that users were encountering non-functioning locking differentials, with the screen listing the feature as coming soon, which is distressing for two main reasons, both of which kind of have to relate to the video game industry, because it reminds me of the current state of things where some games are shipped unfinished to be patched over later, rather than giving us something complete and ready for the world for our $70. The other reason is that it seems a little too familiar to the games as a service model, because there's a non-trivial possibility that features like this could end up being locked behind a paywall. Granted, it's just speculation, but would it really surprise any of you if you actually needed a monthly subscription to have certain features on your Cybertruck? We're living in a post-ownership society where the things that we own are not actually ours. We're leasing or borrowing them from the people who actually do own them, the companies, the rights holders. If you don't have a physical copy of your favorite movie, then you don't actually own your favorite movie. You're able to watch your favorite movie solely at the pleasure of the company that allows you to view it, the streaming service, the video-on-demand provider. It's not really yours. And there may come a time, not to fearmonger, but it's not too far outside the realm of imagination to think of a time where, yes, you may own your car 100%, title in hand, fully paid off, only to find that you don't have access to the totality of its features because you didn't put in your credit card information. And that, my friends, is an abject nightmare for more reasons than I can actually get into. But even non-functioning locking differentials wasn't the sole issue facing Tesla in the early part of this year. In February, a recall of some 2 million Teslas was issued over, of all things, font size, since the text for the braking system and parking indicators was considered small enough to be a hazard unto itself. But that's not all. The piece de resistance is the stainless steel exterior supposedly already showing signs of rust and corrosion on some models. Now, Tesla will protect the steel with paint film, but for the cost of between $5,000 to $6,000 extra from what I could find. This is on a truck that already costs some $20,000 more than was initially promised. So yeah, people weren't happy, and the stock price took a hit, and Tesla ended up laying off around 10% of its global workforce, as we mentioned earlier, which further affected the stock price. Sales are down, with earnings reports reflecting a decline in the number of cars shipped. Hi. So, it is April 23rd, and news has just come out that Elon Musk is moving forward with the Tesla Model 2, with plans to have them released in early 2025. And if he can follow through on that date, wonderful, great. And hey, I was wrong on this. So I've deleted 5 minutes of material about the importance of the Model 2 to Tesla's long-term future. It's just mainly about how important it is to be able to have an affordable option, citing quotes from business analysts and Tesla investors. I could have left it in, but realistically, it's no longer germane to the larger point that I'm making. So we're just going to get back to talking about the Cybertruck, along with one other car that is a part of this whole nexus. So, back to the video. Now, you could argue that some of this decline can be attributed to the decision to discontinue development of the affordable Tesla Model 2 in favor of instead developing a fleet of self-driving taxis, in addition to whatever resources are going into that roadster that can go from 0 to 60 in under 2 seconds. Yeah, you thought we forgot all about that, huh? Like, Elon announced in 2017 that the roadster would arrive in 2020. Now, obviously, the world essentially changed in 2020, and basically everything got pushed back as the universe came grinding to a halt. But it's been 7 years since that initial announcement, and it's still nowhere in evidence, this roadster. If anything, the promises have increased with the rumors that it would use SpaceX technology and potentially fly, like we're living in the Fifth Element or something. It genuinely makes me wonder to what extent the engineers knew anything about the project before Elon announced it. I wouldn't be surprised if there was a non-trivial chance that the 2017 press conference was the first time anybody who'd actually be responsible for building this thing heard anything about this car. Seriously, 0 to 60 in 1.9 seconds, an 8.8 second quarter mile, a 250 mile per hour top speed. Never mind the question of being road legal. Would physics actually allow this for a production car? Or would the materials and hardware needed to make it a reality essentially make it cost prohibitive to anybody but a tax bracket who's probably going to just buy something European anyway? The argument seems to be that we need more affordable options and fewer high-concept, low-return vehicles, because all the press in the world is not going to make a difference if you don't actually have the product line and consumer interest to support it. And whereas the Model 2 seemed to have actual consumer interest and investor interest, Elon would rather chase the Robotaxi dragon at the expense of something that reports would suggest consumers actually want. The Robotaxi looks to be that groundbreaking innovation in a way the Cybertruck really wasn't. And from an investment standpoint, I can almost see the vision with the Robotaxi, as it could supplant Uber or Lyft as the rideshare service of choice, while fulfilling Elon Musk's previous mission of creating a future that looks like the future. The novelty alone would appeal to people outside Silicon Valley. But then, does anywhere else but Silicon Valley have the infrastructure to support this? Maybe Elon has been planning this since long before he announced it, and the team is further ahead on solving these issues than we realize. But then, Elon announced that an unveiling would be ready for August 8th of this year, which seems like an insane turnaround time to me. But Elon is sticking to it, writing, quote, "Not quite betting the company, but going balls to the wall for autonomy is a blindingly obvious move. Everything else is like variations on a horse carriage." End quote. To Elon's credit, the announcement of the Robotaxi fleet helped juice the stock number and stoke excitement among some investors. And as the Reuters report notes, even with sales on the decline, Tesla is still the most valuable automaker in the world today, with a market capitalization in the neighborhood of $500 billion. But the market is still concerned about Tesla's future. While you could argue Tesla was always a tech-forward company, it seems there would become a point at which its focus shifts towards being a tech company first, rather than an automaker. And I can kind of understand the concern. A car company has to make product and cater to the market if they're to survive. They can't pass up what the market is calling for simply because it doesn't excite them, you know? And that kind of feels like what's happening here. Elon wants to innovate, so he doesn't have use for a Model 2 whose only unique feature is that it's affordable. The fact that it'll bring him more money doesn't seem like something that excites him, because money doesn't really seem to matter to Elon. Otherwise, he'd be more concerned about losing so much of it. Case in point, the Cybertruck. I mean, it feels like the design was the entire point. It felt like a play to shock the truck market, like a chef making hard-boiled eggs, transferring them from the hot pot to the bowl of ice water. And in a way, the ambition is admirable. The desire to innovate is admirable. And in Tesla's defense, they did act quickly, but it still feels like the truck, by its very existence, is an act of hubris. Because I'm not entirely sure who this is even for, other than the guy who made it. It doesn't seem to be as pragmatic as a traditional truck, much less these tech-forward modern ones with the stubby, chode-like flatbeds. I spoke about this at length in the latest Race to the Bottom on the Chevy Silverado, but it feels like modern pickup trucks are getting away from the more practical dimensions of the trucks of 20 or more years ago in favor of technology and largesse, because it's not so much about what the truck can do for you from a labor perspective, but what it can do for you from a perception standpoint. And that seems to be the case with the Cybertruck. People who might not consider a run-of-the-mill pickup truck might consider buying this because it's unique. It's a conversation starter. And yes, some Cybertruck owners will tell you it's a great truck and that it drives well, performs well. But I'd actually be surprised if any of the people buying this were people who had interest in owning a truck at any point of their lives prior to this. Because it's a truck, but it doesn't seem to exist for the reasons a person would typically want to have one. The design is about the most divisive I've ever seen in the history of the auto industry, even more so than anything Saab ever made, more than anything with the vision or ambition of a company like AMC. This is the kind of thing you make when your company is basically pure, concentrated operating capital. Yet there's something to be said for a down-to-earth approach to design, a less-is-more approach, not this futuristic brutalism. At least with AMC, or even Pontiac, the designs made sense for the period they were operating in, even if they didn't always look great. I'm looking at you, Pontiac Aztec. I don't know that the Cybertruck makes sense for today. Hell, even Preston Tucker, who was a lot like Elon Musk in his desire to create a car of the future, still seemed intent on maintaining practicality so that it made sense for the average American to want his car in the first place. Not just the people with money, but the average Joe working a 9-to-5. I feel like that's what's missing in the identity of the Cybertruck. It's inaccessible and exclusionary. And maybe that's by design. But if you're going to make a premium product for an exclusive clientele, it has to have more going for it than the fact that poor people can't own it. And I am struggling to see what this actually adds to the conversation other than flame wars on message boards and YouTube comment sections between people who feel Elon can do no wrong and those who feel Elon can do nothing but. Yet ultimately, even by avoiding potential tragedies through this recall, I feel like the Cybertruck will remain defined by its shortcomings rather than by anything it actually does. The Cybertruck is Icarus cosplay, aiming for the sun but falling to Earth and into the waiting embrace of the told you so's. Honestly, it leaves me wondering if there were any engineers who warned Elon about the challenges of scaling a vehicle like this, only to have their concerns waved away, firefighters locked out of the fire. Or if this was an all-hands-on-deck situation that just grew out of proportion to what was planned. Last October, in an earnings call, Elon did his best to temper expectations by stating they had, quote, dug our own grave with the Cybertruck. End quote. The following earnings call in January saw Elon intimating that workers will have to sleep on the production line to meet quotas. Ugh. Now, I can't say for sure what will become of the Cybertruck or what its future is long term. Maybe it'll become the no man's sky of the auto industry, starting out as a critical disappointment that's held up as an example of what not to do, only to then have its reputation bounce back to critical acclaim. But for now, it seems Cybertruck owners are a little more forgiving than its critics. When it comes to the accelerator issue as it concerns the overall quality of the truck, Jose Martinez would tell NBC News, quote, other than this, it's a pretty solidly built car. I know saying other than this makes it sound like it's not major, and it is. Because it is such a massive car, and it's got such a great amount of power, I do feel like things in regard to safety definitely need to be a priority in getting it addressed and fixed. End quote. While Tesla may have dug its own grave with the Cybertruck, it's never too late to put down the shovel. Fans of Tesla's products seem more than willing to give them another chance, even if not all investors have the same confidence. You could say the loyalty of its consumer base is what makes Tesla as resilient as it's been in the past decade. If anything, that's what will likely help keep them above water in the years to come. Whether the stock price ricochets all over creation or remains steady. But loyalty won't hold out forever if the rewards are broken promises and questionable build quality. Wanting to innovate? It's a noble pursuit. But quality endures in history every bit as much as innovation. You don't have to be the first to do something. You just have to do it well.